Chapter 25. Eneko lay on the wooden floor, legs straight in the air, eyes glued on his grandmare. Vittoria's mare stood above him, arms spread out to encompass the massive sea dragon from her story. And then, Mare said, the sea dragon hissed. Out of the ocean it leaped to bite La Principessa in half. She stopped. Her back straightened as she shook a finger back and forth. Her voice dropped to a dramatic whisper. But the sea dragon could not. La Principessa stopped it with a single hand, Eneko cried. That's exactly right. She banished that enemy back to the ocean, and it has never been seen in all of Alkarra ever again. Just like she'll save us. He tilted his head to the side. Only the dragon isn't real, but she'll still save us. Maybe from Hodei? Mare leaned over to kiss his forehead. Wah, my boy, wah. Vittoria watched the warm scene from where she sat curled up next to Per on his bed, her fingers braided through his. Their comfortable cottage far outside Nechi boasted a sturdy ceiling and wooden floors. The haze of smoke from the city was only a smudge in the distance. Lush trees covered rolling hills that led to the old quarry, a massive scar against the highest hill. Dust filled the air and covered their belongings, but Mare didn't mind at all. Life here was full, happy, rich with fresh air and sunshine. Eneko had put on weight. He almost had dimples in his elbows, and he ran barefoot through the thick, rich dirt. Scrolls were scattered across the tabletop, and toys filled a woven basket in the corner. Banat's men rotated through to check on them in shifts every day. They had been teaching Mare and Per simple magic. Even Eneko could do easy spells, like moving a cup across the room or making toys out of dust. She felt a moment of longing, a desire to stay forever and experience it with them, to see Eneko wake up in this heaven every day, to set aside the fear of civil war, of Mateo's death, of becoming a High Priestess. But an easy life would be empty without Mateo, Zuri, Banat. The purpose distributing the food baskets gave her, as if she'd found a second family and loved them both. The quarry was an abandoned place, falsely believed by the landowners to be dangerous. Fortunately, it proved an effective training ground and hiding place for the refugees La Salvatore and La Principessa now took on their nightly rounds to the farms and to Nechi. Every now and then, dust rose from the cliffs as stones fell. The sun sank lower, signaling the end of a lovely day. Eneko's eyes grew heavy. He grabbed his favorite wooden sea dragon, hugged Vittoria so tightly his hands dug into her ribs, and slipped into a small room that was his very own, with a broad glass window at the top. She marveled at the reality. Eneko sleeping in his own room, a luxury she'd never imagined. You must go, Per asked, breaking into her thoughts. Vittoria squeezed his hand, gathered his water cup, and stood with a nod. Thanks to an apothecary, Per's coughing fits had dramatically lessened. Pain no longer dulled his features. He'd never walk again, but he moved around the roomy house and outside in a chair with wheels on it. You are quiet, Per said. At the gentle concern in his voice, Vittoria turned to face him. His wrinkled face was lined with worry. Knobby, thin legs stretched out in front of him beneath the blanket, twisted at odd angles from disuse. Thinking, Per. Of? She sighed. Eneko's future and how much brighter it can be now. How I hope this doesn't end. How I... Thoughts of the future lead to no productivity in the present. She smiled. I will allow myself this one dalliance. He grinned in return. I can sense your thoughts are heavy, he continued, more seriously. Are things that bad in the city? She'd given them no updates except to tell them that Sannara was well and hoped to visit again soon. La Principessa rarely came up as a topic, and she didn't encourage it much. They lived in a blessed bubble here. Mare cooked for Banat's men, and Eneko worked as an errand boy in the quarry training grounds. She didn't want real life to intrude on their dream. There was no telling how long this bliss would last. As bleak as it has ever been? She clutched his hand and forced a smile. I think I'm just always sad to leave. He enveloped her hands in his. His skin was soft, not calloused and brittle anymore, the way it had been on the farms. To have you here brings me great joy. You are always appreciated and welcome to Masuna. But your life awaits in Nechi. There is much for you to do. I can respect that. Her gaze drifted to the horizon. The sun was gone now, taking the last light with it. Mateo expected her to stay the night, but that had never been her real plan. She had a 3-hour walk back to Nechi, 4 to get to her destination. If all went well, she'd be home by the time Mateo started breakfast in the morning. Suddenly, she wished she'd learned transformative magic already, even if it frightened her. I must. She nodded. But I will return. Per had been one of the lucky old ones, the last generation of witches who learned to read and write before Hodei implemented his education and magic ban. On the farms, they used to sit outside and watch other workers return to their makeshift homes. Story-making time, Per would say, and invent wild, hilarious tales about the witches as they passed. A smile ghosted Vittoria's lips at the memory of the farms. The dirt under her fingernails, the thick scent of hay and manure. Being back in the country made her miss it. It felt like another lifetime. She tried to capture the memory and keep it close, because there wasn't a guarantee she'd ever see them again. The final battle was still weeks away, but one never knew. What would the reception of her amongst the rebels be? It was impossible to guess. Saying goodbye was so hard. Already, their years in Nechi seemed a lifetime ago, as if a different witch, a more frightened one, had lived it instead of her. Unable to bear it a moment longer, she pressed a kiss to each of his cheeks and straightened again. Mare approached, a warm shawl tucked around her shoulders against the chilly evening. Winter would sweep in soon. This time, they would be fine. For now. Mare embraced Vittoria when she finished slipping her cloak on. Mare was a woman of the streets, a survivor. She hadn't made it this long with depths of affection. But now, safe in the country, she seemed to have an abundance of it. Vittoria mourned her lost opportunity to know this side of Mare better. Please, Mare murmured, tears in her eyes. Let me plead to La Principessa, the greatest of all givers, for you. Vittoria nodded, emotion thick in her throat. Mare put one hand on the carved figure of La Principessa on the wall and held Vittoria's hand with her other. The carving looked a little bit too much like Vittoria for comfort. To La Principessa, may our bread be filling, our hearts be giving, and the moments of joy greater than the sorrow. Bless our daughter on her path. Mare lifted her head to signal the end of the plea. Thank you for coming home, Vittoria. Now go. Save the world with your power, whatever the power is that La Principessa grants you. The wench lay swathed in shadows. Vittoria's heart beat double time in her chest, occluding her ears with the sound of rushing blood. Although weary from the long walk, off the edge of the road where she wouldn't be seen, the fear of what lay ahead kept her from feeling her fatigue. Scratches from bushes and trees marred her arms. The sting of pain warmed her cheeks where a cutting branch had crossed the healed scars from Hodei's nails. However tonight ended, her Nechi family, Banat, Mateo, Zuri, and all the witches who worked so hard to keep her safe, would be upset about the risk she was taking, the lie of omission that brought her here. Maybe they would feel betrayed that she'd taken matters into her own hands and gone into the rebel world. Maybe she'd be kidnapped and disappear. Maybe she'd get the information and everything would be fine. Regardless, she'd have to repair the damaged trust, and she would. Eventually, maybe they would understand. Despite that, her resolve was ironclad. She'd do anything to keep her family safe. Mateo had already refused to speak about Esperanza, and no one else knew much of the elusive High Priestess. Not Zaldar or Zuri, perhaps Banat, but she didn't dare risk asking him. Besides, she felt deep in her bones that something wasn't right with Hodei's strange errand. Something brewed in the subterranean depths of Nechi, and now she was La Principessa. If she was going to save her witches and spark hope for a better future, she had to chase down every opportunity to prevent the brewing civil war. The wench proved unusually busy, perhaps due to the new curfew implemented after the ball attack. All witches were supposed to be in their houses by dark, which meant that the younger, wilder workers naturally violated the rule as a means of quiet rebellion. The curfew made navigating Nechi in the moonlight a terrifying prospect. Still, she'd made it. Her nerves felt frayed already, but she was here. Vittoria gently pushed her way around idle men as they guffawed or brooded. She wore a black cloak with the hood pulled over her head. Unlikely, at any rate, that someone here would recognize her, but she wouldn't take any chances. Finally, she managed to catch McCall's eye and lifted her hood ever so slightly. He saw her and waved her back. She navigated through the sweaty crush of bodies and half-empty food pails to the familiar hallway. This time, a burly male witch stood there to prevent access. One nod from Mikal, however, and he admitted her. What did it mean that Mikal trusted her back here? "Sannara?" she asked the witch. He nodded to the same room as before, then gave her his back. Vittoria stepped closer to Sannara's rooms, trying to ignore the noises coming from behind closed doors. "Hurry, hurry," her thudding heart seemed to say. She had no idea what the time could be, but it likely encroached on midnight. Safely working her way here had taken longer than she'd expected. What if Sannara wasn't here? The scuttle of rats in the walls made her shiver as she lifted a hand and knocked softly. A moment's pause came just before the door opened. Sannara peeked out with a frown that deepened when Vittoria pulled her hood back. She reached out, snatched her arm, and yanked her inside. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. Vittoria shoved her hood off. "How long have you been with the rebels?" The ballroom attack flashed back through Vittoria's mind with new urgency. There was no doubting the thin figure in the gray robe, or Sannara's astonished voice. "La Principessa, is it really? Are you—" Vittoria had known the moment she heard the voice who hid in that hood. Only shock had kept her from tearing Sannara out of the castle and shaking her. Then Sannara had left with the other rebels. Now, the guilt in Sannara's eyes spoke worlds. She released Vittoria and folded her arms across her chest, appearing more troubled than angry. "Here's now," she murmured, gaze downturned. "I don't know how many. It was before I met you." She shrugged, arms spread helplessly. "What choice did I have at the time? I was young when my parents died from the winter fevers, not old enough to do the work of a lavande maid, and no one would conscript an orphan. It was sell my body or work for the rebels." Vittoria gestured to the straw mattress on the floor. "But don't you—" "No." Sannara shook her head. "No, I haven't sold my body that way. I'm a messenger. This is all just a cover for the rebels." She waved a hand, and Vittoria wondered whether she meant the room or the wench. "Rebels bring me messages from the catacombs. I organize workers on the street, who report in every night, and we run messages between rebel groups. Most rebels can't read or write, though some can. I'm in charge of making sure that rebel groups still communicate." Vittoria frowned. It explained the errands in the middle of the night, the food, the secrecy, the long disappearances. How many days would it take to go to the furthest covens? Weeks for some parts of the network. Sannara likely hadn't told anyone because Per would have been so against it. "Violent," he always said. "They stir up anarchy, but that solves nothing. They're too wild, too impetuous. A better life does not come from that path." Her responsibilities also implied that the rebels weren't as fractured as Mateo thought. "Can you leave it now?" Vittoria asked. "Now I can guarantee food and a safe place, at least for a while. Sannara emphatically shook her head. "Among the rebels, there is no leaving. My life is decided, Vittoria. I chose this path so I could eat and be sheltered, and now it's set. It's a roulette game I've played since before I met you. It's nothing you can save me from. I accept it for what it is." "Did Anton know?" she asked, to buy time, to figure out a way to convince Sannara that Eneko needed her. They needed her. Sannara laughed, but it was more bitter than amused. "Yes, it's where we met." Vittoria's eyes widened. Sannara grimaced and sighed again. "Anton joined the rebels as soon as your family arrived from the farms. Rebel contacts were how he managed to get your mere work in the Moretti house and all of you a place to sleep. At least initially. He never told you because he feared your pair's displeasure." Another rat scuttled across the far wall. Somewhere in the distance, someone muffled a scream. A woman cried out, then fell silent after a crack. Vittoria comprehended almost none of it. "Anton and the rebels," she murmured weakly. Things had been bleak when they first sought refuge in Nechi after Per's accident. They'd been near to starvation. Anton, an ideal older brother, had always tried to protect her. Sannara's voice sharpened. "Your parents must never know." "Of course not." "The attack at the castle," Sannara began, then halted. "When I saw you, I was shocked. Rumors of La Principessa had been swirling, but I hadn't known it was you." "Why were you there?" Sannara snorted. "I shouldn't have been, but Someone special wanted me to go." She wouldn't quite meet Vittoria's gaze. "I think he wanted to show me what he thinks he can give me after." The implication was clear enough. After the uprising. A dark feeling crawled through Vittoria's chest. "Who is this man?" "Doesn't matter," Sannara said. "He's very possessive and determined to have me. He loves me in his way. There's no denying him." "Are you safe with him?" "Yes, it's fine. Vittoria, why are you here? It's not safe for you to be anywhere." Sannara gazed around, alarm in her eyes. "Where is that man who came with you before? Are you here alone?" "Yes, I'm alone. I came to ask a favor." "What?" Vittoria pulled in a breath, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain this crazy errand? She was admonishing Sannara to leave the rebels, even as she sought them. Finally, she managed to say, "I need to speak to someone in the rebels. After the ball, when I realized you were one of them, I thought to come to you." "What?" she snapped. "Not on Mateo's behalf, I hope. That—" "No." Vittoria shook her head. "No, Mateo doesn't know I'm here. That's why I'm alone." Sannara's gaze narrowed. "Then who do you need to speak to?" "Anyone that might remember Esperanza. I need information about her." A full 3 seconds passed before Sannara seemed to grasp the words. Something like astonishment clouded her features. "Why would you say that name?" "I need to know more about her." "About the dead High Priestess?" "Yes." "And you're asking the rebels?" Sannara's voice was too carefully controlled now. Blank, almost toneless. An equally empty expression had slipped over her face. "Yes." "Why?" Vittoria hesitated. What was this change that had come over Sannara? It meant something, surely. Fear lingered in her gaze. Uncertainty. Her eyes darted to the door, then back to Vittoria. "Hodei sent me," Vittoria said. "He's threatened to kill Eneko if I don't find out some information about Esperanza." Sannara sucked in a sharp breath. The sound of footsteps came from outside. She yanked Vittoria away from the door and motioned for her to be quiet. Then they heard the clipped voices of 2 men. Sannara paled. "You must go. He's early." "Who is early?" "By the givers, if he finds you here." But there was nowhere to go. Nowhere Vittoria could hide. Helpless, Vittoria mouthed, "Who?" The footsteps stopped outside Sannara's door. Sannara's terrified eyes widened. She gripped Vittoria's hands in her own, her fingers a cold vise. "I'm sorry." The words fell off Sannara's lips as the door creaked open. A familiar face entered the room, then stopped. Dread filled Vittoria like a rising tide as she took in his strong shoulders, serious expression, hazel eyes and black hair. He blinked, mouth half open in an exclamation. "Romeo." Shocked, he looked from Vittoria to Sannara and back again. Questions filled his silent gaze, then seemed to vanish as he stepped into the room. Something cold came over him and hardened in his eyes like a glacier. "La Principessa, how delightful to see you again." The door closed behind him.